Welcome, everyone, to another edition of the Travel Show with your host, Ted Blank of Ted Blank Luxury Travel and Adventure. It's Thursday, which means we are going to be talking about travel, and I can't wait to hear what our topic is today. How have you been?
I've been doing really well, enjoying this little warm-up we've been having.
I'm loving it. Yes. Did you shovel? Because if you did, you didn't have to. Because
I know it was a waste. Good exercise, right?
It was, and I guess, it was kind of dicey for a couple of days. When I went out to get the mail, I was nervous I was going to fall, but now
there's still ice in a few spots, so it was good that I shoveled, and I appreciate my neighbor who plows the driveway.
That's so
shout
nice.
Out to him as well. If he's
no
listening.
Kidding. Wow, you're pretty lucky. That's awesome. So, what are we going to talk about?
Well, I thought we would maybe stick with the subject that kind of relates to cold weather a little bit, and we could talk about an interesting natural wonder that I think a lot of people would love to
igloos.
See, not igloos.
They're
You're
not
close.
natural.
You're close. Well, they're natural. I guess they're sno.
Let's see. We're going to talk about icebergs.
Icebergs, no.
Okay.
But you might see some icebergs on the way.
Cold topic. We're going to talk about that hotel that's made of ice.
Nope, we're not going to talk about that, or Superman's cave either. No, we're going to talk about the Northern Lights.
Oh,
yeah,
love it.
Yeah, and I had a chance to actually go see the Northern Lights last fall, and just had an amazing experience that I'll talk a little bit about. But I don't know if folks listen to some of the science news that's been on the radio recently or in print, that the next 12 to 16 months. So kind of right now, January of 2024 through sometime in 2025 is going to be a peak in the solar activity that causes the Northern Lights. So the Northern Lights are going to be much, much more visible for the next 12 to 18 months than they've been in a long time.
Well, that's great news, because I know two people that have seen the Northern Lights on their bucket list.
Ah,
Isn't that weird?
Very nice.
But it's not something that you can
we're
seek
just
out?
a little too far. Oh, it is. It absolutely is.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
Yeah, we're just a little too far south here to have much of a chance of seeing them. Once in a very, very rare occasion, we'll see them here. If you go up to northern Minnesota, you can sometimes see them a little bit more. But in order to see the Northern Lights, you really need three things.
Okay.
You need to be close to the North Pole.
Okay.
You need to be in the dark, and you need to have a lot of solar activity. And I didn't really know when I went on this trip to see the Northern Lights, I didn't really know what caused them.
Yeah, what is solar activity?
They're caused by essentially solar wind.
Solar
and so
wind.
The sun bubbles and burbles, and
it does?
It does, and it goes in cycles. And so whenever 5 or 6 years ago when the sun was burbling the most, it's taken that long for these little particles that get sent out, sort of like solar dust.
What are you talking about?
Yeah, the solar dust comes, and when it hits our atmosphere and the light is right, that's what creates the Northern Lights. And because of the Earth's magnetic field, those little particles get sucked up to the top of the Earth.
I feel like
all this stuff I learned. Yeah, no, this is the extent of my.
Are you for sure, Ted Blake?
Yeah, this is the extent of my Northern Lights knowledge. No, but it is caused by the solar wind. And it's charged particles, like ionized particles.
And like you said, it takes that long for them to come.
It takes a while for them to get from the sun.
Just
and so it
amazing.
just so happens that right now, coming up in the next 12 to 16, 18 months, is a peak of those particles hitting the Earth. So the Northern Lights are going to be really very, very active, much, much more active than normal.
So the particles have been on their way for a bunch of years.
For a while, yeah.
And can you see them traveling? Is that
No,
how
you can't see
scientists?
them. No, you
okay.
can't see them traveling.
How do
But
scientists know this?
I don't know. That scientists know all these things.
Okay.
I don't know. I just read the science textbook. Yeah, but they create these beautiful colors, these reds and these greens and these purples, and they're going to be particularly vivid in the next year or so because there's so much solar activity. But because of the North Pole and the magnetic pull of the North Pole,
that part I don't understand either.
Yeah, most of the particles get drawn up to the North Pole. So the further north you go, the more likely you are to see the Northern Lights. And then, of course, it has to be dark, because if the sun is out, you're not going to see the Northern Lights.
There's a lot of things that have to come together.
They do. But the good news is that pretty much over the next year, the Northern Lights are going to be out almost every day. But if the daylight is too long, or like us, you're too far south, you won't see them. If you happen to live like in northern Alaska or up in northern Scandinavia, Iceland, you may see them almost every single night.
Wow.
Yeah, and so for travelers who want to see and experience the Northern Lights, early spring, January through March or April when the nights are really long and dark up north, and November, December when the nights are really long up north are a great time to go see the Northern Lights.
When you saw the Northern Lights yourself, is it a light show or is it just like a sunset?
It's a light show.
Okay.
We saw them a couple times. I was on about a 2-week trip that was a cruise along the coast of Norway. And the most spectacular night, they lasted for about 45 minutes. And it was a light show. And other nights, sometimes we saw shorter light shows, or oftentimes you'll only see the green color. And if you look at pictures of the Northern Lights, you'll oftentimes see the green color. And so sometimes we saw that for a little bit of a shorter period of time. And then one night we had just this cathedral of light. I mean, it was absolutely amazing. One of the most amazing experiences of my life. And so it was really neat to see that and to experience that. And so I can understand why folks who have the Northern Lights on their bucket list. Absolutely. So I'd say next 12 to 18 months is the time to go.
And when you say time to go, where should we go?
Yeah, so you have to go north. And so the prime places that people go to see the Northern Lights, certainly number one is Scandinavia. Northern Norway, northern Sweden, northern Finland, and Iceland are places where the Northern Lights are very often visible.
So
northern Alaska and northern Canada,
up
too.
in the sky?
It's up in the sky.
Or is it off? You know how sometimes you can't really see a sunset if you are not...
It'll depend.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yep, it'll depend.
Okay.
So sometimes it can be just lights on the horizon. Other times it's lights that stretch up for a while. And sometimes the whole sky is filled with the Northern Lights. So it really depends on what's happening. And I think because of this solar activity in the next year or so, we're going to be seeing them. The most spectacular, most colorful, most vibrant Northern Lights in a decade are going to be happening in the next year.
Had you ever seen Northern Lights before
I had
this
seen
trip?
just very, very small glimpses of them from here. And I think one time I was on an airplane and I saw them, but nothing at all even close to this.
How do you describe it?
You can't. I mean, you sit there and you're literally surrounded by a cathedral of light, and the lights are bright.
Do they shoot or what happens?
They shoot, they shimmer. Well, they don't shoot like shooting stars, but they kind of
Okay.
shimmer like a curtain blowing in the wind. And so, they look like a curtain. Actually, if you see pictures of them, they look like a curtain, and the curtain is kind of blowing in the wind, and it kind of looks like they're blowing in the wind, and the colors come and go. And if you have a camera on your cell phone, you could take a little time-lapse picture, and you can actually see even more vivid color because that time-lapse really brings that to life, and it can cover the entire sky. And it's just one of those almost speechless moments of like, oh my gosh, this is really happening. And that's exactly what happened on this cruise that we were on. I was sitting in the hot tub. And the night before, we had actually gone out on an excursion to look for the Northern Lights. So we all crowded into a bus and headed off into the Norwegian wilderness, to commune with the elk and reindeer and all that stuff. And we didn't see the Northern Lights that night at all. Not a peep. And then the next night, sitting in the hot tub before dinner, the sky just came alive. And so, you can never predict when it's going to be. But I would say on our 2 weeks up in Norway, we saw the Northern Lights 5 or 6 nights, and one was incredible, one was amazing, and the rest were, shorter, just kind of glimpses of things. So you never know exactly what you're going to get, but again, I think in the next year or so, you're going to really have the best chance of seeing the natural phenomenon at its peak.
And so are travel companies putting together trips specifically for this?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
And they are selling like hotcakes.
Oh.
And it's interesting because who in their right mind would go to the northern coast of Norway in the middle of the winter? But yeah, people who want to see the Northern Lights. So there are tours, land tours that have been put together. There are cruises, and cruises are great because when the ship leaves port and heads out to sea, you don't have any of that light from land to get in the way. So you have a really incredible viewing platform. Along the coast of Norway, Iceland, both cruises, land activities, Alaska as well. Typically, they're going to be land activities in Alaska. Now, when we've talked about Alaska before, and we've talked about some of the cruises and cruise tours you can take, those are going to be in the summer. And so the light is going to be too bright, too late in the evening to see anything. So you'd have to go back in the winter.
But it's still happening.
It's still happening. You just can't see it. Yeah, so it's like, the tree that falls in the forest and no one's around. Does it make noise? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. These have become very popular. And, National Geographic had a special recently about the Northern Lights, and I think it's really piqued people's curiosity and their interest. And so if this is something that's been on your bucket list, definitely let me know sooner rather than later, and we can find a nice opportunity for you to see the Northern Lights.
So where would you recommend we go? Or are there more than one place?
There's more than just the Northern Lights, too. Iceland is a very interesting place, very active geologically. There are volcanoes always erupting there. It's kind of like a Yellowstone Park.
Yeah, you could go on a nature.
Yeah, you can go
trip.
see the nature in Iceland as well, and you've got things to see during the day and things to do in the evening when it gets dark. And the nice thing about being that far north is it gets dark pretty early, so you don't have to stay up till 2 a.m. to see the Northern Lights. So Iceland is really popular, easy to get to.
It is?
From
Tell
Minneapolis.
me.
Yeah, Iceland has become incredibly popular as a tourist destination, and both Delta and Iceland Air fly nonstop from Minneapolis.
And what is it, like 8 hours, 7 hours?
About six. It's about halfway to Europe.
Okay.
So pretty easy flight and lots to see and do. In Iceland, you can see it by land. You can see it on a cruise that goes around Iceland. You can see it on a cruise that goes even further north towards the North Pole or heads over to Greenland. So that's very popular. Alaska, people fly into Anchorage or Fairbanks, and you can just kind of go out of your hotel in the dark at night and see the Northern Lights. They're pretty accessible. And there is actually a lot to do in Alaska in the winter. It's a often overlooked aspect of Alaska. Mm-hmm. And so certainly the Northern Lights are a nice attraction to go there. But you can go skiing in Alaska.
That's what you've said.
Yeah, so it's a lot to see and do there. Mm-hmm. And then Norway, and the coast of Norway in particular, because it's so accessible to cruises, has made that a popular, kind of a year-round destination. And so there are actually some cruise lines that have a Northern Lights guarantee. And so they guarantee that you will see the Northern Lights.
That's kind of what you want.
Yeah, and if you don't, you can come back and take another cruise and try again.
Oh.
From what I understand, they've never really had to redeem that offer, but it's nice to know that that's there. And certainly, like I said, November, December, January, February, March, when the nights are going to be the longest, is probably the best time to go. And the particular cruise that we took last fall, it actually left from England. And so we flew to London, which, again, easy to get to, nonstop flight. And we cruised up the coast of Norway, north of the Arctic Circle, turned around, and came back. So winter for me started like November 5th, and it snowed in the town of Narvik, which is one of the northernmost cities in Norway. And they have a cool innovation there, besides just the Northern Lights. They have heated sidewalks. And the snow takes care of itself.
They do?
Which I thought, well, that's a really cool thing. Why don't we have that in Minnesota?
That's so smart.
Yeah, I know. We have so many Norwegian immigrants here. You'd think we would have figured that out. But they're interesting towns and cities to see along the way. We got to see some wildlife as well. And even that excursion out into the hinterlands where we didn't see the Northern Lights. It was still pretty cool because we went out to a Norwegian national park and just had a chance to kind of stand out there in the dark, and pretty quickly your eyes got acclimated, and you could watch the little waterfalls that were dripping and stuff. And there was enough light from the moon that we could see some things. But, everybody would always point to the sky. Oh, look, is that the Northern Lights? And no. And so that whole night was kind of a little bit of a disappointment. But then the next night, absolutely more than made up for it.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, it was really incredible. And I think if folks have been, thinking, hey, it'd be neat to see the Northern Lights, now's the time to do it, because it's going to be 10 to 12 years before this cycle happens again. It's the solar cycle that's causing all these, really incredible views. And I think next year the folks who go will have an even better view than we had last fall.
Are you going to explain to me again how the solar lights
No, I'm not.
What are Northern Lights?
Yeah,
yes.
So the neat thing about going on a cruise to look at the Northern Lights is they bring experts on board who will talk not only about what the Northern Lights are.
Nice.
Yes, that's where I learned it.
Okay, I was going to say.
Yeah, I didn't really probably pay too much attention in science class that day, but they will explain to you how the Northern Lights work. And they also help you figure out how to get the most out of your camera or your phone.
Oh.
So you can take those neat pictures, because taking time-lapse photos and understanding which setting to press on your phone to get that, sometimes that's the most complicated part of the trip, is to figure that out. So we had someone come on board who gave a lecture on actually the Northern Lights, and very interesting too how the native Eskimo type folks who lived up there, how it became part of kind of their spirituality, the Northern Lights, and they were kind of scary and ominous. And so
you would think they would be. If
yeah,
you didn't
yeah,
know what was
it's
going
dark
on.
and you got these kind of interesting things going out there. So apparently naughty kids would be sent outside when the northern lights were out, and they would get kind of nervous and scared and freaked out. So interesting, really interesting.
Scared straight.
More scared straight, exactly. More to that story than just the scientific piece. And then we had someone who gave a demonstration on how to take the best photographs with a camera, with a cell phone, and that was really useful because I didn't know where those settings were on my phone. They're like right there, but who knew?
Well, I guess I didn't know either.
Yeah.
Still, though, I'm sure looking at the picture, it is nothing like the real life,
No,
right?
it really isn't. And you really can't get the full, the entire sky was full of reds and purples and greens. I mean, just amazing, just incredible. And if you've never seen it, it really is incredible. And if you see it here, we tend to see it on the horizon really distant from us, and maybe there's a little bit of shimmering going on, but not too much. And here you were, like, literally right in the middle of a dome of light, and that was just amazing.
And
An
the
amazing
particles
experience.
went there because of the, what did you say, the
The
draw?
the magnetic,
The
the
magnetic-
magnetism of the North Pole and the South Pole. These do exist in the
Okay.
South as well, but there's not as much land down there, so there aren't as many places you could see it from.
Right.
There's land is a lot closer up there, but yeah, the magnetism of the North Pole and the South Pole attract these particles, and then as they hit the atmosphere, they create these incredible
Light
light
shows.
shows.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really neat, really cool
Oh,
thing.
I love it.
Yeah.
So, Ted, of course, we should be planning this now,
We should be.
okay?
Yes, we should be planning it now. Very much so.
And how do we do that, please?
Yeah, so the best way to get a hold of me is to give me a call at 651-964-8245, or you can visit my website, tedblanktravel.com, and you can request an appointment with me or a member of my team there, and we've got all sorts of great Northern Lights ideas that we can share with you, from Iceland and Norway to Alaska and even the north of Canada.
So appreciate you telling me that. I'm going to tell my friends that this is on their bucket list. Thank you so much. The Travel Show, of course, is heard on KDWA with your host, Ted Blank of Ted Blank Luxury Travel and Adventure. And this is AM 1460 and FM 97.7, KDWA in Hastings. This travel show has been brought to you by Ted Blank Luxury Travel.